Hello, my name is Paul French, and in this recording, in this episode, we're going to be exploring the intricate relationship between political leadership in the United Kingdom and the British media. To explore this, we need to consider some of the core principles of the Conservative, and to a lesser extent for this episode, the Labour Party as well, to examine how major media outlets like the Daily Mail, the Times, the Telegraph often show bias towards or in favour of the Conservative Party. So the UK, it has a rich political history, predominantly shaped by the two main big major political parties, the Conservatives and the Labour Party. So let's start by looking at some of their core policies, because we're all going to be expected to go to the voting booths in a relatively short space of time. What is it, the 4th of July? And for a lot of us, I would suspect by the time we get to the voting booths, well before that, we already know who we're going to vote for. But often we don't really understand, or we haven't really taken the time to look at the policies within manifestos. I'm not going to examine the current iteration of those manifestos. I'm going to raise a few points on the general points, so the general ideologies, traditionally speaking, historically speaking, of each of these parties. So the Conservative Party focuses normally on policies such as reducing government spending, lowering taxes, promoting what we call free market principles, and emphasising law and order. How these policies have looked practically over not just this current Conservative government, but also across the Thatcher and into the John Major, early 90s John Major government that introduced neoliberalism. So how have they looked across those? You've got Tony Blair's New Labour government for 15 years in between Thatcher Major and then into this current 14-year span of Conservatism. How have those policies looked? And, austerity, buzzword perhaps over the last 14 years. Austerity was part of the Thatcher Major governments as well, which involved cutting public sector funding, reducing welfare benefits, and limiting or spending on public services such as healthcare, the NHS, and education. In short, these are reductions to the safety nets accessible to everybody in society. Now, granted, there are some in society who are going to be much more likely to need those safety nets than others, but nevertheless, they are there for everybody when they are required. One of the other core tenets of a Conservative Party manifesto, any one over the take your pick, in terms of the elections over the last number of years, is lowering taxes. So this is where the Conservative Party has often advocated for reducing taxes to stimulate economic growth. For example, 2019, they promised to cut the income tax rate for higher earners and to reduce the corporation tax rate to attract businesses and investment. However, as we know, that we understand, we should be aware of tax rises from the Conservative government since 2019. They're talking at the minute about how they've actually lowered taxes. Yes, they have very recently, but this is after tax rises. So they've gone against what they would traditionally try to promote from within their own manifestos ordinarily. The Conservatives also promote free market principles, which enables the privatisation of public services to, and I quote, increase efficiency and competition. So there's been many examples of that. Margaret Thatcher, for example, selling off the coal mines, the reduction of social housing as well under the Thatcher government. The current iteration of conservatism, privatising Royal Mail in 2013, give or take a year or so, which aimed to, as they would have put it, and still put it, and would still argue now, to modernise and make the postal service much more competitive. How is that working out? I need to ask, because it's not very good around where I live. In short, if there is, I suppose the rationale here from conservatism is that if there is public ownership of these services, then there is limited capacity for private companies to make money. Let's say the NHS, free at the port of call or the point of service, however they like to put it, but either way, when we say free, it's free. It's obviously funded through taxation. But nevertheless, if you are in need of healthcare, you bring yourself to an NHS hospital, you're going to get seen, and you're not going to be lumbered with a massive bill at the end. But because that service exists, then privatised healthcare in the United Kingdom, well, you've got two choices. Let's say you break your arm. You're not in any need of, it's not, it's obviously something that needs treating right away, but you're not, just in and of itself from a broken arm, you're not going to die. So you've maybe got a bit of time to think, am I going to go to the NHS where I'm not going to get lumbered with a massive bill, or am I going to go private? In that moment, what are you going to do? Likelihood is you're going to go to the NHS. So because the NHS exists, it makes it very difficult then for private entities to make profit. And this used to be the case across the spectrum of society, because we had the Royal Mail in state hands. We had train services in state hands, water companies, gas companies, all these different state-owned assets were tax-funded, which meant that there wasn't money to be made for private entities, or much money to be made at least. So this is where so-called free market principles come into play, and then austerity to boot, because the two come hand in hand. Because the winding back of government from their responsibilities in things like healthcare, social care, housing, education, so on and so forth, it is for the benefit of those who have capital, those who have or are in a position for money to be made. So we need to really recognise that, because I see all too often conservative voters who advocate that they support the NHS, they support state-run schools, all of these socialist ideas, but they don't really realise that by voting Conservative, they're voting against those. So they either know what the Conservatives are about, and this is just, folly to try and fool everybody else, or they genuinely don't understand. And this is why I was quite baffled by the fall of the so-called Red Wall in 2019 to get this quote-unquote oven-ready Brexit over the line, because those traditional quote-unquote Red Wall areas, typically Labour areas, were going to be most susceptible to the pains of not just Brexit, but also a Tory majority-led government. It didn't make sense. So there's been plenty of examples of privatisation. And look, I've got plenty to throw at New Labour as well. The privatisation in particular of the prison and the probationary services under Tony Blair's New Labour. I mean, it shouldn't be forgotten. It's got a part to play, and I will dissect that in future videos. But here, focus predominantly on the Conservatives. But just as we're on Labour, in contrast, traditional being a key word, Labour Party values or manifesto pledges or ideologies traditionally advocate for increased public spending on services, higher taxes on the wealthy, a push for social equality, and stronger workers' rights. Yes, ordinarily under Labour, you may pay more in taxes than you would do under Conservative leadership. However, under good leadership, you should and would see better functioning of those public services, those safety nets, in return for higher taxation. That's the trade-off. Unless you've got a lot of money tucked away, and the vast majority of this country don't. We're a wealthy country, but only really wealthy for a few. So unless you've got quite a bit of money tucked away, then you are much more likely to need these state-run social services. So a traditional Labour Party, I would argue that they're not in any way a traditional Labour Party at the minute. They haven't been for a very long time, in my opinion. New Labour really weren't that much either. Centre-right, not traditional, centre-left to left. But either way, the idea is if you pay more in taxes, you get to see more as a collective, as a society back in return. But bringing our focus back to the Conservative Party and other right-leaning emerging parties, let's say Reform UK, go back a little bit, UKIP maybe. So bringing focus back to these right-leaning parties, if you look at history, if you look at our history, and who's been in charge, voted democratically over the last, say, 100 years, we are a majority Conservative nation, traditionally and long-standing Conservative nation. It's typically long bouts of conservatism and fluctuations of other parties, typically Labour, especially the last few decades. And the media plays a crucial role here in shaping public opinion and influencing political outcomes in order to maintain that conservative dominance for the most part. However, we should recognise that we say this a lot. We know, I think we do recognise it, but we don't really do too much about it. The media plays a crucial role in shaping public opinion because their bias is a significant factor. And in the United Kingdom, many major outlets have a notable, blatant slant towards the Conservative Party. I don't really understand it. And it's all this, it's all the current Conservative Party seem to really have at the minute, albeit they seem to have dialed it back a little bit over recent weeks. But certainly in the run-up to when Rishi Sunak called the election, they were basically trying to plug culture wars and trying to say that the wokerati, the snowflakes on the left and the media and these people who they just seem to be making up in positions of power within the media and other leading social institutions who are on the left and trying to work against the best interests of the people of Britain and the will of Brexiteers and all this. The Daily Mail, The Sun, The Telegraph, The Times, now we've got GB News, we've got Talk News. Yeah, all right, we might have The Guardian and the independent newspapers where we're predominantly right-leaning news outlets in this country. So don't be fooled into thinking that the left narrative is quote-unquote winning here. It's really not. Media bias in this country is largely for The Sun, and you're forgetting one major right-leaning tabloid, The Sun. Who could forget? But look, we are in a country where right-leaning bias is the dominant narrative, and it does typically favour the Conservative Party. For example, the Daily Mail, which is, I really hope that we know who, I really hope that we haven't, but unfortunately I recognise that we probably have, understand that it is a widely read UK-based tabloid, and we should know as well that it often supports Conservative policies and its leaders. Boris Johnson, they had a massive hard-on for Boris Johnson. During the 2019 elections, I remember that the Daily Mail ran more than enough headlines promoting Boris Johnson and heavily criticising the likes of Jeremy Corbyn, the then Labour Party leader. One such headline, I made a note of it, ran along the lines of Boris Johnson, the only man to get Brexit done, whilst articles frequently labelled Corbyn as a threat to national security, and articles that were ran based on very, very little. When you look at the content, it's basically opinion pieces, but they're not presented as that. Similarly, The Times and The Telegraph have shown consistent support over the decades for the Conservative Party and its policies as well. The Times are known for its highbrow, broadsheet, influential leadership, and it often emphasises the apparent economic shrewdness, shall we say, apparently, of Conservative policies, whilst The Telegraph has been vocal in its support for Brexit and Conservative economic strategies. Now, The Telegraph should be traditionally a broadsheet, high-quality newspaper, albeit, maybe slanted, but still a broadsheet. In recent years, it's basically a glorified tabloid. For any of you that actually consider what The Telegraph has to say or follow what it has to say. But for example, the Telegraph's headline, can't remember exactly when it was posted, to be fair, but they did run with a headline once upon a time, which stated, "Why Boris is the right leader for a post-Brexit Britain." Just exemplifying again, that bias. The Times praised the Conservatives' economic policies and headlines like, quote-unquote, Tory economic plan, crucial for growth. So look, this media bias, it isn't just about or seen, it certainly heightens around election periods, but it is a continuous influence on public perception, contributing to the idea that the United Kingdom is a traditionally conservative country. And there's plenty of academic research as well to support this. Research by Hunning et al. in 2020 discusses the bias in the visibility of conservative and pro-Brexit positions in British media during Brexit. Research by Cushion et al. In 2018 examined how right-leaning newspapers influenced the agenda of television news during election periods. How in 2020 investigated the pro-Brexit bias in British media. And research by Bure and Nadler in 2020 again investigated how conservative media bias influenced public sense-making and emphasised the role of conservative press in shaping political discourse and public opinion in the United Kingdom. Basically, in short, is that this isn't just my observation. I don't believe what Michael Gove once said is true in 2015, 16, that this country is done with experts. I don't believe that. And if you are in any way appreciative of actual academic research, valid research, then there's plenty of it to say and support the notion that we are in a conservative-led country, but one that is cultivated, one that is built upon bias and really a bit of an untruthful slant or an untruthful way of going about this building up of support for policies from a particular party that are meant to be for the benefit of all, that are really just for the benefit of a few. So this bias, it can shape political attitudes towards policies and leaders. And look, it often frames the Conservative Party as the default, as the default choice for stability and economic management. So look, you might well think that, and I suppose because of the long activity of Conservative Party election wins, that record of, the UK consistently voting in Conservative Party majorities and what have you, that they are the mainstay, that they are the default, and that Labour is, and other parties, if we go back further in history, the other parties are just the exception, not the Conservative rule. And again, look, the media have this part to play in maintaining that perception. So more academic studies have shown that media endorsements and the frequency of positive coverage for conservatism and their values can significantly affect voter behaviour. So when media outlets consistently support a particular party, it can reinforce that party's policies and leadership as the norm, marginalising alternative perspectives. Heaven forbid, and it seems to have become what it's been a dirty word for a while, socialism. Heaven forbid the notion that our taxes should go towards something that's going to benefit everybody. We seem to have reached this point where, the taking of a percentage of our income for the betterment of everybody. Why aren't we talking about this in terms of patriotism? Instead of standing on the south coast waving your fist furiously at a boat coming across with a few migrants on it, why aren't we talking about patriotism in the shape and form of trying to better your country for everybody through holding current government to account in what they do with the money that they take from us? That conversation hasn't been had. And it's not been had because we live in a country where the conservative media aren't going to hold themselves to account. That's just not going to happen. So when media outlets consistently support a particular party, in this case the Conservative Party, it reinforces their policies that work for people with capital, people already well off and with money, and it marginalizes alternative perspectives. It's pushed this idea that we can live in a capitalist society, but we can enhance the social aspects of that society as well. So the why of this relationship between media and the Conservative Party or leading political parties, we could take this argument, we could have it in, and we could apply it to different countries. It would be, different to that country, but it would still have legs. But the why of this relationship and support, it is look, and I've spent years writing the PhD thesis on this. It is complex and it is multifaceted. And what I would say is that it is a mutually beneficial relationship, as you would imagine, and at its core, for me, is monetary gain for both. Let's throw power and monetary gain into the mix. That's what both media institutions and political entities have to gain from this mutual relationship. I will explore such relationships in hopefully many future videos, though for now I would, if anybody's watching this and they would like to maybe get a little bit more clued up, I can't recommend any more what is a classic. It's a staple book in this realm of thought, published by Edwin Herman and Noam Chomsky in 1988, entitled Manufacturing Consent. And it talks in great detail, quite sophisticatedly, about the relationship, not just between media and political entities, other leading social institutions as well, but it does it fantastically. And albeit 1988, the landscape has changed quite a bit over the last 3 or 4 decades, but this book in particular, at least its core arguments, they still very much have legs. So I would recommend that. And look, understanding media bias, it's nothing short of crucial for a healthy society, for a healthy, working, functional democracy. And such a complex process of public manipulation links back to one of my previous videos on the criminological notion of social harm. Processes, just as a bit of a very light summary on that video, social harm considers processes in society that aren't necessarily illegal by the codified definition. They're not codified as being illegal in law, but they often because, I suppose, the existence of such processes, such harmful processes, are beneficial to those who make the law. So social harm, it looks at processes that aren't illegal, but they are harmful. And they aren't codified as being illegal because often they're going to bring a bit of flack for those who make law or those who are in powerful positions. So these behaviours, those who are going to be, if things were brought into, if law was passed, it would basically be a negative for those who are in positions of power and wealth. And this argument, everything I've been talking about here, in terms of especially rollbacks through aggressive austerity economic policy, which is an ideological political choice, should be considered, I would argue, in this criminological consideration. And it has in academic circles. But that consideration, that critique of government, of the choices that they decide to make in the economic sense as being harmful, and if they're harmful, then maybe there should be legislation more closely aligned to those decisions as well. Liz Truss, for example, and that disastrous mini budget. If you're going to play games with the economy, then you should be held accountable. So as consumers of news, it is important to seek out diverse sources of information. If all you do is read the Mail and the Sun, then you're going to have those perspectives, those outlooks on the world that they give you. So I would say diversify your sources of information. It's all well and good me as an academic saying this because I am steeped in these kinds of topics and I've got access to a whole wealth of different sources. But for the for everybody else, do your best and deliberately try to diversify your sources. By doing so, you can get a more balanced and informed opinion. Have a few, if you've got, I don't know, you're not going to buy newspapers these days, but if you've got, these apps on your phone, just download a couple more. Just recognize who's going to give you different opinions and download a couple more and start to notice on the same stories just how differently, particularly when it comes to politics and the economy and everything else, just how differently they word, frame, and present information to you on the same topics. Okay? Thanks for watching. If you found this discussion insightful, as always, please like, share, and subscribe for more content on the likes of criminology, politics, media. I've not really pigeonholed myself into any one particular bracket. So if you like this, please do like, share, and subscribe. And I will see you again next time.